Right now you feel stuck, confused, maybe even desperate. But once your state is aligned, events begin moving without effort. Doors open, people shift. God rushes in where resistance ends. Most people begin at the wrong end of the problem. They look at their life as something broken out there and assume the solution must also come from the outside. More money would fix this feeling. A different relationship would finally bring peace. A change in circumstances would allow confidence, freedom, or joy to appear. Yet the harder they try to rearrange the outer picture, the more stubborn it becomes. This is the great misunderstanding that keeps effort alive and results distant. The belief that life must change first, so that the inner state can finally rest. Neville Goddard dismantles this idea at its foundation by pointing to a truth that feels almost offensive to the effort-driven mind. God does not act through struggle, force, or personal exertion. God acts only through consciousness, not through what you do, but through what you are being. The world is not responding to your attempts, your affirmations shouted through tension, or your endless fixing. It is responding to the state of consciousness you consistently occupy. Until that state changes, the same patterns must repeat no matter how clever or determined you are. Neville used a simple yet devastating analogy to make this clear. If the image in a mirror looks distorted, you do not reach into the glass to correct the reflection. You clean the surface that is producing it. In the same way, life is not the problem to be fixed. It is the reflection being displayed. When perception is distorted by fear, lack, or struggle, the image must appear distorted. When the lens is cleaned, the picture reorganizes automatically. The effort has always been misplaced. This is where many people stumble over the word God. They imagine an external force deciding when to intervene, judging worthiness, or withholding outcomes. Neville was uncompromising on this point. God is not outside of you responding to requests. God is the awareness that is aware of being. God is the I am. When you shift the state of I am within yourself, God is already acting. There is no delay, no negotiation, and no permission required. Consciousness moves first and the world follows. Modern neuroscience echoes this same principle through a different language. Dr. Joe Dispenza explains that your internal state is constantly broadcasting signals into the field of life. Thoughts charged with emotion become instructions. Feelings become commands. When your inner chemistry is ruled by stress, fear, or anticipation of lack, you are signaling those states repeatedly, and life organizes to match them. When the inner state becomes coherent, calm, and unified, the signal changes, and so does the response. The outer world is not personal, it is obedient. This is why forcing change feels exhausting. You are asking effects to fix causes. You are attempting to correct reflections while leaving the source untouched. The moment you stop trying to wrestle life into submission and instead bring your attention inward, something begins to loosen. You realize that peace does not come after alignment. Peace is alignment. Relief is not the reward at the end of effort. Relief is the signal that the state has shifted. The promise of this teaching is not that life will become perfect overnight, but that it will begin to reorganize without strain. When the inner state is cleaned, corrected, and stabilized, you no longer need to chase outcomes. You no longer need to monitor every detail. The intelligence that governs reality takes over automatically. Events line up, conversations unfold, opportunities appear, and obstacles dissolve in ways you could never plan, not because you forced them to, but because you finally stopped interfering. This is the threshold of the work. Not learning how to fix your life, but learning how to clean your state. Once that is understood, everything else becomes inevitable. At some point, effort itself becomes suspicious. You notice that no matter how much energy you pour into fixing, improving, pushing, or correcting, the same themes keep circling back in different disguises. The details change, but the emotional texture remains familiar. The bills may look different. The relationships may have new faces, yet the feeling underneath tells the same story. This is not bad luck or coincidence. It is the natural consequence of trying to repair effects while leaving the cause untouched. Trying to fix the outer world without first aligning the inner state is like rearranging furniture in a burning house. You may feel productive for a moment, even distracted by movement, but the fire remains. The heat continues to rise. Eventually, the effort collapses under its own futility. In the same way, when fear, lack, or resistance remain active within consciousness, no external adjustment can bring lasting relief. The environment must reflect the condition that produced it. This is why so many people experience brief improvements followed by sudden reversals. A breakthrough seems to arrive, only to dissolve weeks later. A solution appears, then demands constant maintenance. These are not failures of technique or discipline. They are signs that the inner alignment was never established. Consciousness was still divided, still reacting, still identifying with the problem even while trying to escape it. The state did not change, so the world could not remain changed. There is also a hidden cost to this approach that often goes unnoticed. Every attempt to fix the world first reinforces the belief that the world has power over you. Each reaction, each emotional charge, each frantic correction silently declares, "This controls me." Over time, this strengthens the very state you are trying to outgrow. Struggle becomes familiar, effort becomes identity, and peace feels conditional, always dependent on the next outcome. When this pattern is seen clearly, something profound happens. The mind begins to question the entire strategy. If pushing does not work, if correcting effects only deepens exhaustion, then the order must be reversed. Instead of asking how to change circumstances, a different question arises. What state am I occupying that makes these circumstances inevitable? This is not self-blame, it is self-recognition. The disruption is not meant to discourage you. It is meant to liberate attention from the wrong battlefield. Life has never been asking for more force. It has been waiting for alignment. The moment you stop trying to save the reflection and turn inward toward the source, effort begins to dissolve on its own. And in that pause, a new possibility quietly emerges. There is a quiet reversal that changes everything once it is truly grasped. Most people believe that life responds to urgency, to intensity, to how serious the problem feels. They assume that if something hurts enough, worries enough, or matters enough, reality will finally move. Yet experience keeps revealing the opposite. Problems shouted with emotion tend to echo back unchanged, while shifts that occur quietly within seem to rearrange the outer world without announcement. This is not coincidence. It is law. Neville Goddard stated this without hesitation. Consciousness is the only operant power. Life does not respond to what you dislike, complain about, or attempt to escape. It responds to what you are conscious of being. A problem is not a command. It is a symptom. When attention stays glued to the problem, consciousness remains anchored in the state that produced it. No amount of emotional pleading can override that fact, because the signal has not changed. A useful way to see this is through the image of a thermostat. A thermostat does not react to complaints about the cold or heat in the room. It does not respond to frustration, urgency, or explanations. It responds only to its setting. If the setting remains the same, the room must return to that temperature, no matter how often it is disturbed. In the same way, consciousness maintains its state, and life continuously adjusts itself to match it. Events rise and fall, but the baseline always reasserts itself. This is why trying to solve problems from within the same state that created them feels like running in place. The mind stays busy, the emotions stay activated, but nothing fundamental shifts. The world is not ignoring you. It is obeying you. It is faithfully reflecting the internal setting you have not yet questioned. Once this is seen, the struggle begins to lose its authority. The great reversal happens when attention moves away from the problem and toward the state beneath it. Instead of asking how to fix what is happening, awareness begins to notice what it is being while it happens. This is not analysis or self-criticism. It is a simple recognition of identity. As that recognition deepens, the state starts to loosen, and with it, the outer conditions that depended on it. To change results, the internal setting must be cleaned, not argued with, not suppressed, not forced into positivity, simply adjusted at the level of being. When that happens, life has no choice but to follow. If this is already shifting how you see effort, control, and reality itself, subscribe now. Stay aligned with reminders that change your state first, and let life reorganize without force. Cleaning your state is often misunderstood because it sounds like another task to accomplish, another improvement project for the self. Yet it has nothing to do with fixing who you are or reshaping your personality into something more acceptable. It is not about suppressing unwanted thoughts, forcing optimism, or trying to feel good when you clearly do not. At its essence, cleaning your state is about removing identification. It is the quiet withdrawal of attention from patterns that have been mistaken for identity for so long that they now feel natural, justified, even necessary. Most inner disturbance is not created by what happens, but by the meaning automatically assigned to what happens. That meaning arises from a state already in place. Fear does not come from circumstances. It comes from a fearful state interpreting circumstances. Lack does not appear because resources are missing. It appears because a state of lack is already active and scanning reality for confirmation. Cleaning the state, then, does not involve wrestling with thoughts or emotions one by one. It begins with recognizing that these thoughts and emotions are expressions of a deeper position consciousness has taken. Identification is subtle. You may not be actively thinking, "I am afraid," yet the body reacts as if danger is present. You may not consciously believe in lack, yet the mind habitually anticipates disappointment or delay. These reactions feel personal, but they are impersonal programs. They are conditioned responses running in the background, quietly shaping perception and behavior. Cleaning your state means noticing that these reactions are happening without concluding that they define you. The moment they are seen as activity rather than identity, their authority weakens. There is an important distinction here that Neville emphasized repeatedly. You do not overcome a state by opposing it. Opposition keeps attention locked onto the very thing you wish to dissolve. Struggling against fear still centers fear. Arguing with doubt still grants doubt significance. Even excessive self-observation can become another form of fixation. Cleaning is different. It is the simple cessation of participation. When you stop feeding a state with reaction, explanation, or justification, it begins to collapse under its own weight. This is why many people feel exhausted by self-improvement. They are constantly monitoring, correcting, and managing themselves, believing that vigilance equals progress. In reality, this keeps the nervous system engaged and the old states active. Cleaning your state is not a tightening of control, it is a release of it. It is the recognition that consciousness does not need to manage its contents in order to change. It only needs to stop identifying with them. A useful way to understand this is to observe how energy returns when unnecessary mental activity quiets down. Think of how a device slows when dozens of applications are running invisibly in the background. You may not see them, but their presence is felt in the drain. When they are closed, performance improves without adding anything new. In the same way, when emotional habits like anticipation, self-protection, and inner commentary are no longer running unchecked, vitality and clarity return naturally. Nothing is added. Something is removed. Cleaning your state also does not mean becoming emotionally numb or detached from life. On the contrary, it restores sensitivity. When reaction fades, perception becomes clearer. You respond rather than react. You feel without being overwhelmed. This clarity is not achieved through discipline, but through rest. Consciousness must be given the space to settle, just as muddy water clears when it is left undisturbed. Trying to force clarity only stirs the sediment again. This is why attempts to clean the state through constant mental effort often fail. The conscious mind is conditioned to analyze, judge, and control. While it can understand these ideas intellectually, it struggles to release identity at a deep level. There is a quieter condition of awareness where the grip of the old state naturally loosens, where effort drops away and receptivity takes its place. In that condition, the sense of self softens, and new assumptions can be accepted without resistance. When this cleaning begins to happen, there is often a subtle sense of relief that has no obvious cause. Nothing outside has changed yet, but the pressure has lifted. The urgency to fix, to explain, to protect starts to fade. This is not indifference, it is alignment. Consciousness is no longer divided against itself, and when that division ends, the state that required constant maintenance can finally dissolve. There is a point each day when effort naturally loosens its grip, when the mind becomes less rigid and identity less defended. This threshold is neither full wakefulness nor full sleep, yet it carries a quiet authority that ordinary thinking does not. Neville called this condition the state akin to sleep, not as a poetic phrase but as a precise description of where real change occurs. It is the moment when consciousness becomes impressionable again. free from the habitual resistance that dominates the waking mind. In ordinary awareness, identity feels solid. You know who you are, what you have experienced, and what seems possible or impossible. These assumptions operate automatically, filtering perception and regulating emotion. In satsas, that solidity softens. The body relaxes, the senses withdraw, and the mind stops scanning for problems to solve. This relaxation is not laziness. It is a return to neutrality, and neutrality is fertile ground. Neville emphasized that states, not circumstances, shape life. Sats is significant because it allows a state to be accepted without argument. When you are fully awake, the mind often rejects new assumptions by comparing them to past evidence. It asks whether something is realistic, justified, or deserved. In Sats, that questioning fades. Consciousness is no longer busy defending an old identity. It becomes receptive, like soil no longer compacted by constant pressure. An effective way to understand this is through the image of muddy water. When the water is stirred, particles remain suspended, obscuring clarity. No amount of force can make the water clear while it is in motion. When it is left undisturbed, the sediment settles naturally and clarity returns on its own. Sats functions in the same way. As mental movement slows, emotional residue settles, and a clearer sense of being emerges without effort. This is why Neville insisted that feeling is the secret. Feeling in this context is not emotion charged with excitement or strain. It is the quiet acceptance of being. In Sats, feeling precedes thought. You do not convince yourself of a new state, you allow it. The moment consciousness accepts a different sense of self as natural, even briefly, the seed is planted. The duration is less important than the depth of acceptance. It is common, however, for the senses to resist after this inner shift. Old assumptions do not dissolve instantly. They may surface as doubt, emotional echoes, or contradictory appearances. This does not indicate failure. It indicates that consciousness has moved and the surface layers are adjusting. Just as the water may cloud briefly when sediment begins to settle, perception may momentarily react when a new state is introduced. Neville was clear that SATS is not a technique to force outcomes. It is a condition where control is relinquished. When the desire to manage the process fades, imagination becomes creative rather than compulsive. Images arise gently, feelings deepen without strain, and identity shifts without announcement. The power of Sats lies in its simplicity. Nothing dramatic needs to happen. There is no performance to maintain. What changes here is not the content of thought, but the level from which thought arises. Instead of thinking from effort, you are thinking from rest. Instead of imagining from longing, you are imagining from possession. This distinction is subtle but decisive. When imagination operates from rest, it carries authority. Consciousness recognizes the state as real, and life has no choice but to reorganize around it. Over time, repeated exposure to this condition weakens the old identity. Reactions lose intensity. Emotional habits soften. The urgency to check, control, or correct begins to dissolve. Sats does not override the mind. It retrains it gently by showing it a different reference point. Identity shifts not through discipline, but through familiarity with a calmer, more stable state of being. This is why Neville referred to Sats as the gateway. It is not the end goal, but the point of entry, where consciousness becomes clean enough to accept a new assumption without resistance. From there, the work is no longer work. The state begins to live itself, and the world quietly follows. When an inner shift has taken place, it is tempting to believe that everything should immediately feel calm, clear, and resolved. Yet this expectation itself often becomes a source of confusion. After consciousness moves into a new state, traces of the old one frequently remain, not as proof of failure, but as residue. These emotional echoes can be unsettling because they appear to contradict the inner change that has already occurred. Understanding this phase is essential because misinterpreting it is one of the most common reasons people abandon alignment prematurely. Neville referred to this experience as divided consciousness. It is the condition where a new state has been accepted at a deeper level, while the nervous system and emotional memory are still adjusting. The mind may have relaxed its grip, yet the body remembers old patterns. Feelings arise automatically, without a clear cause, and thoughts surface that seem out of place. This does not mean the old state has returned. It means it is losing coherence. Emotional residue behaves much like dust in a room that has already been cleaned. The surfaces are clear, the clutter removed, yet particles still float in the air for a time. Movement makes them visible, but their presence does not mean the room is dirty again. In the same way, when consciousness settles into a new position, old emotional responses may still appear as the system recalibrates. They are not instructions, they are after effects. The difficulty arises when these sensations are interpreted as meaningful. The moment attention reacts to them, analyzes them, or tries to correct them, energy flows back into the old pattern. Reaction breathes life into what was already dissolving. This is why Neville emphasized non-interference. When reaction stops, a greater intelligence takes over. Life does not require constant supervision to reorganize itself. It only requires that consciousness stop contradicting its own movement. This stage can feel uncomfortable because it removes familiar reference points. The old identity no longer feels convincing, yet the new one has not fully stabilized at the surface level. There is a gap where the mind cannot rely on habit, and the body has not yet learned the new rhythm. Many interpret this as instability, when in fact it is integration. The system is reorganizing itself around a different center. What makes this adversary subtle is that it often disguises itself as responsibility. Thoughts arise suggesting that something must still be fixed, checked, or improved. Emotional discomfort demands explanation. The urge to return to effort feels justified, even urgent. Yet this urge belongs to the old state. It is the reflex of control, attempting to reassert itself. Recognizing this without judgment is enough to weaken its pull. Neville was clear that the world rearranges itself once consciousness is no longer divided. Division comes from reacting to appearances while claiming a new inner position. Unity comes when the inner position is allowed to stand without defense. This does not mean suppressing feelings or pretending they are not there. It means allowing them to pass without assigning them authority. Feelings can move through awareness without being taken as signals. As this allowance deepens, something subtle but powerful happens. Emotional waves lose their intensity. Thoughts arise and fade without gripping attention. The sense of self becomes less tied to momentary states and more anchored in a quiet stability. This is not detachment from life. It is freedom within it. Experience continues, but it no longer defines identity. Eventually, the residue clears on its own, not because it was fought, but because it was no longer sustained. The nervous system adapts. The body learns the new baseline. Reactions that once felt automatic begin to feel optional. This is the sign that the new state is stabilizing, not through force but through familiarity. When this stabilization occurs, effort becomes unnecessary. The need to monitor inner conditions fades. Consciousness rests in itself. From this rest, life begins to move with surprising precision. Circumstances adjust without drama. Solutions appear without struggle. The adversary dissolves not through confrontation, but through irrelevance. And in that quiet victory, a deeper intelligence quietly takes the lead. There is a distinct shift that occurs when effort loosens its grip, and it is often quieter than expected. Nothing dramatic announces it. The mind simply stops pushing, and in that pause, something else begins to move. This is not resignation or passivity, but alignment. Strain fades because the need to control has dissolved, and in its place arises a sense of right timing that cannot be manufactured through effort. Neville described this condition as inspired action, not to suggest bursts of motivation, but to point to action that arises without inner resistance. When consciousness is settled, behavior aligns naturally. Choices feel obvious rather than forced. You are not calculating outcomes or managing impressions. Life begins to meet you halfway, not because it has changed its rules, but because you are no longer contradicting them internally. This is when events begin to organize themselves. Conversations shift tone without effort. Delays resolve without being chased. Situations that once demanded constant attention seem to untangle on their own. The absence of struggle does not slow things down. It accelerates them. Like traffic that clears the moment you stop forcing a shortcut, flow returns when pressure is removed. What makes this stage uncomfortable at first is the absence of familiar tension. Control has often been mistaken for responsibility, and relaxation can feel irresponsible until experience proves otherwise. Yet again and again, life demonstrates that it does not require supervision to function intelligently. It responds to coherence, not vigilance. As alignment stabilizes, urgency fades. The impulse to check, correct, or anticipate diminishes. Confidence becomes quieter and more stable, no longer dependent on reassurance. Desire is no longer projected into the future because it has been absorbed into the present state of being. This is the point where trust is no longer a concept, but a recognition. Watching God act is not about waiting for something to happen. It is about noticing what happens when interference ends. Effort dissolves because it has nothing left to do. The inner state is clear, the signal is consistent, and life responds with precision. When the inner state becomes settled, life begins to move with a quiet precision that does not call attention to itself. Neville described this movement as the bridge of incidents to explain how reality reorganizes once consciousness is no longer divided. What unfolds is not a sudden resolution, but a natural sequence of events, each one leading calmly into the next. These incidents are rarely dramatic. They appear ordinary, sometimes even inconvenient. A conversation happens unexpectedly. Plans change without warning. A delay redirects you in a way that only later reveals its value. Individually, these moments seem insignificant. Together, they form a coherent progression that could not have been planned. Life responds not with spectacle, but with order. At this stage, the mind often seeks confirmation. It wants to know whether things are working or where the process is leading. Yet alignment does not provide reassurance. It provides movement. When consciousness is stable, it does not require visibility of the entire path. Each step appears as needed, and the sequence continues without resistance. A defining feature of the bridge is its impersonality. It does not protect comfort or conform to preference. Some events may challenge old expectations, yet beneath them is a sense of correctness that does not need explanation. When attention remains settled, there is no impulse to interfere or control. As this unfolds, emotional intensity fades. Excitement gives way to stillness, not because desire has disappeared, but because anticipation is no longer required. The bridge completes itself quietly. Only afterward does its structure become clear, revealing that order emerged naturally once interference ended. The Sabbath is the inner signal that alignment is complete. It does not arrive as excitement or relief, but as rest. Effort fades because there is nothing left to manage or correct. The mind stops reaching toward outcomes, and attention settles naturally into the present without tension. Desire no longer feels distant, not because it vanished, but because it has been accepted as resolved within consciousness. In this state, control relaxes, worry loses its function, life is engaged without urgency or inner pressure. This rest is not withdrawal, it is clarity. The Sabbath confirms that the identity has shifted, and from that stillness life continues to unfold without interference. Neville's central truth becomes unmistakable once effort finally exhausts itself. God moves the moment you stop interfering. Life was never asking for more control, more emotional intensity, or more correction. It was responding faithfully to the state that was active within consciousness. When resistance dissolves and inner division ends, movement begins naturally. What once felt delayed or blocked starts to rearrange without persuasion, because the signal has become clear. This is why alignment is not passivity, it is authority. When the inner state is settled, you are no longer negotiating with circumstances or reacting to appearances. Life responds because it must. The sense of control drops away not as surrender to uncertainty, but as recognition that the work was never external to begin with. Authority arises from coherence, not effort. Neville's mirror analogy captures this with precision. You do not adjust a reflection by touching the glass. The moment the inner image is corrected, the outer picture has no alternative but to follow. Delay exists only when attention remains divided between what is assumed and what is observed. When that division ends, reflection becomes inevitable. This understanding aligns seamlessly with Dr. Joe Dispenza's insight that a coherent inner state reorganizes external conditions. When thoughts, emotions, and identity move together, reality adjusts without resistance. Fragmentation dissolves, and order appears without force. From here, there is nothing to chase. Rest replaces urgency. Stillness replaces monitoring. As Neville reminded, creation is finished and the final recognition is simple. Be still and know that I am. Stay aligned. Let truth unfold. Subscribe here.